St. Patrick's Day is celebrated by a lot of people in American culture, focused on leprechauns, shamrocks, luck, wearing green as to not get pinched, music festivals, and dancing. However, in Irish culture, this day is to embrace the influence of Christianity and paganism, but it is heavily influenced by myths. Today, I will be informing you about mythology in Irish culture. First, I will explain Celtic mythology and how Irish mythology is connected to it. Second, I will describe the important history of mythology in Ireland. Lastly, I will talk about how mythology still has an influence on Irish culture to this day. Celtic mythology is from the Celts of ancient times, which included people from Britain, Scotland, and Ireland. But small areas in other regions along Europe's west coast as well. Celtic mythology is described by Mary McKeown in her article, Celtic Mythology, Myths of the Ancient World. The Celts were mostly farmers and were pagan and did not desire written language. This mythology focused on nature, creatures, gods, magic, romance, and heroic stories. Irish mythology is the most well-known subgenre of Celtic mythology. The most popular myths include leprechauns, St. Patrick, fairies, changelings, and the banshee. Now that we have described Irish mythology, we can talk about its important history. Mythology has usually been carried on through oral tradition and then literature. The monks in the 11th century were the first people to preserve mythology, which is why we know so much about it today. Irish mythology is the most well-preserved form of Celtic mythology, followed up by British and Scottish mythology. The history of Irish mythology has been separated into 4 cycles, described by Max Usman in his article, Once Upon a Time, Irish Mythology Crash Course. The mythological cycle is the earliest recorded myths that were written down by monks in the 11th century. These myths tend to focus on the early history of Ireland, describing godlike Celtic people and their settlements. The Ulster cycle is from 1st century AD, which included stories about war, meaning the sorrows and warriors that came with it. The Fenian cycle is 3rd century AD, with more protagonistic ideas of romance and heroes. This included magic animals and nomadic people, with a clear, insightful protagonist. Lastly, the historical cycle is the most recent, around 220 to 475 AD, that focused on the life of being a king. There were less aspects of magic, but the attention was brought to the history of architecture and kingdoms, while some even mixed together history and fantasy for this mythology. Now that we have fully described the history of Irish mythology, we can talk about how it influences Irish culture today. Irish mythology is an important aspect of Irish culture because it emphasizes their love of storytelling. Throughout history, Myths have been carried on within each generation through starting with oral tradition, then through literature, and finally through media. Captivating an audience with a myth using oral tradition is still highly regarded in Irish culture today because people are showing their appreciation for their heritage. Irish culture is said to expand imagination, which is described in the article Irish Folklore and Its Relevance Today. Irish culture is heavily influenced by food, clothing, and music, but most importantly, by myths and storytelling that has gone on throughout Ireland's history. Irish mythology is a subgenre of Celtic mythology. It is the most preserved mythology history, and it still heavily impacts culture today with the storytelling and holidays. Next year, when St. Patrick's Day comes around, you can be more educated on how the myths have influenced Ireland's culture and celebrate with Irish the joy, religious freedom, and imagination, all influenced by